am new to your community, and I'm so very impressed. Sorry, he's downstairs trying to check out the time. And I am just awed. I'm awed at everything that you all have been able to accomplish and do here. My mother-in-law has a different rare degenerative neurological disease, MSAC, multiple system atrophy cerebral, and they have not been able to accomplish anything like what you all have done here. So huge kudos to everybody in this room and online. Kudos to everybody in this room and online. So I also wanted to share that I have a child who was born with a fairly rare congenital heart defect and has been through lots of surgeries, etc. So I understand everything I'm going to talk about. And then finally, I've been doing Zoom presentations for 2 years now, and this is one of my first in person, and I'm a little nervous, so bear with me. So, why the bitter and the sweet? Comes from not being able to choose our life circumstances, right? We can only choose how we respond in the midst of an unchangeable situation. And the most important thing really is the attitude you take, which sounds like a platitude, but I'm going to try and go through some things and some psychological research, because I'm a psychologist, to explain why that is so. They did a study in 2010 that shows what Chris put on that beautiful film strip, that demonstrated that athletes with non-recoverable spinal cord injuries were analyzed to see what contributed to their belief in that they had a quality of life. And the conclusion it wasn't what affects the belief of physical limitations, but preventing the loss of purpose and meaning for people. And the quality of life satisfaction increases when you rebuild aspect of your lives affected and reclaim that meaning and purpose, which is very much what Chris was talking about. Not easy, right? Everybody in this room knows that. And because ALD right now can't be solved, with bows to all the doctors and researchers in the room, and there isn't a cure yet, it boosts the intensity and the deep meaning in life in a really condensed amount of time. And a quest to really restore a sense of control over the uncertainty that each obstacle brings. ALD has lots of ambiguity, complexity, unpredictability. It requires constant adaptation strategies and coping responses to maintain life quality and reduce depression, anxiety, anticipatory grief, lowered self-efficacy, and lowered self-empowerment. And that's the bitter. So let's try and find some sweet out of that by discussing ways to maintain emotional wellness. And that obviously is an ongoing process. It's not something that is an on-off switch. So let's start with cognitive reappraisal. And that's the attempt to reinterpret an emotion eliciting situation in a way that alters its meaning and changes its emotional impact. So just a powerful way to nudge emotions back towards a nice baseline. In particular, it involves recognizing negative thought patterns and changing them to more productive ones. And notice I didn't say positive ones. I said ones that were more productive, because positivity is important, but productivity is how you're going to get to positivity. So changing your thoughts can in turn change your emotions, turn the emotional temperature down a few degrees, and have you feeling more even-keeled, right? And that is much less exhausting whenever you're in a negative situation. A couple of examples that I've talked about with people here. Your child just had an MRI, and you ask the tech, how does it look? And the tech tells you to wait for the radiologist, which is just exactly what the tech should tell you, right? But it's still kind of frustrating. Or you're at a restaurant and the bathroom may as well be in Atlanta. It's so far away. And the chairs and tables are put in a really impossible configuration to get through. And then there's people in the way, and bus people and waiters and waitresses, and it's really difficult, and you begin to worry, am I going to wreck everybody's evening? Is this not going to go well? These are recipes for a slow burn, and then a slow burn can turn into being really ticked off. And that can get hotter because anger is a hot emotion, cheeks flush, and run away and then begin to encompass that negative thought of, why me? And then expand to just anything that happens to come into your mind with a free flow, Why isn't there this? Why didn't my doctor do that? Why do I have this? I'm mad at the constant uncertainty. I'm mad at the burden this places on my family. I'm mad at the changes in my family roles and responsibilities. And then feeling guilty about being kind of cranky and mad. And then feeling angry that you're feeling guilty about angry and mad, right? So and. And interrupting this perfect storm isn't easy, but it can become easier with each time you do it. And each time you take a breath, literal or figurative, or 2 or 3 or 10 or 20, the act of considering other interpretations or perspectives and other ways of looking at things influences your feelings and your actions. So you're really in a loop of there's an event, and then quickly on that event is an emotion, and then the emotion intensifies, and then almost so subtly you don't notice, a thought process comes onto the emotion, and then from the thought process comes a behavior, and then you go back to the same loop where it reinforces the emotion, which reinforces the thought, which reinforces the behavior. So when you're in a really difficult situation, one of the best things to do is to use a cognitive reappraisal, fancy word, to just say, how else can I think about this? One of my favorite questions is to ask myself is, well, if I wasn't in a bad mood, how might I be thinking about this situation? I was just in it down trying to check out, and there was a long line and one person, and I was like, oh my gosh, everybody wants to talk and tell this other woman her life story. Just hurry up, And it was because I was rushing, right? It had nothing to do with anything else. And in another situation, I may have been the woman with the concierge talking, right? Another good question is there anything I can do about this right now? Or what am I really angry at? And this is a flexing of both cognitive and emotional muscles. And in order to flex like this, you have to have 4 constructs involved, 2 that are action-oriented and 2 that are belief-oriented. The action is to actively look for alternative ways to interpret the situation. 2, actively look for ways to find mastery throughout losses and adversity encountered. And I love that word mastery, but its true definition really isn't proficiency or superiority. It means having the upper hand, which is just a little bit of something. Just a tiny little upper hand in a situation can make all the difference. So mastery is a really powerful thing when you're living with loss, to try and have over anything that you can have, because the more mastery you feel, the more you feel you can gain more mastery. And then the two belief constructs are believing in my ability to manage my reaction to upsetting experiences, and believing in capabilities to continue finding meaning and purpose. So that brings me to what ifs, right? Adversity causes our brains to dwell on what went wrong. That's how we're hardwired, just to, then begin to look for other things that go wrong. And the loss just kind of bleeds into other aspect. So suddenly, whatever has been going on starts turning into, what if this doesn't happen, or what if that doesn't happen? What if the bone marrow transplant doesn't work? What if my child develops cerebral ALD? What if I can't provide for my family? What if I lose my ability to walk? What if my family and friends think I'm a burden? And on and on and on. And it really does bleed into that. And anyone who's faced a life-threatening illness always has a ton of what if scenarios. And when you have that kind of medical uncertainty, it can almost seem like worrying helps you, but it really doesn't. Anxious thoughts destroy your confidence in your ability to function and build self-efficacy, and effectively let some steam out of the daily living uncertainty ALD kettle. So, self-efficacy beliefs, what are those? Why am I even talking about it? They are regulators of emotional well-being. And they do that through cognitive, motivational, affective processes. And regulate means controlling the flow. So when bad things happen, people who believe they'll be able to control the flow of their thoughts, actions, and moods are more likely to persevere in those efforts. So that it's kind of a superhero power, self-efficacy. You can control flow, reject negativity, and leap tall buildings in a single bound. And unless people believe they can produce desired goals through their actions, they have very little incentive or motivation to persevere. And I believe that perseverance really is the most important thing to combat a feeling of failure. And living with a disease like ALD involves daily small failures and defeats. And so perseverance is an absolute necessity. So what are some ways you can help develop this? Obviously, setting short-term goals. Things you want to get done in the next hour, the next day, the next week. Short-term is really the thing to focus on. You may have an overarching long-term, but focus on the short-term. Break any upsetting problem down into its smaller parts. That's called chunking. Chunk stuff. Get out your Skippy jar and chunk. Expect the uncertainty and expect it's going to maximize the worry so that it can help you recognize the worry, and that the worry doesn't mean that what you're predicting in the future is actually going to happen. And so if you expect uncertainty, then maybe you'll be disappointed and the predictability won't happen. Don't plan from A to Z, plan from A to B. By the time you get to B, everything will have changed. And that helps minimize a lot of that living in the future. Use constructive coping self-statements, which is, I think, a healthier way of saying positive affirmations. Sometimes something like that can fall flat. I can look in the mirror all I want and say, "You're not old. You're still beautiful. You have no wrinkles." But it's much better for me to say something like, "Gosh, MaryAnn, your wrinkles don't detract from your ability to smile or relate to people," right? And then making a list of things that you're prevented from doing and a list of workarounds so that you actually feel like you begin to see in black and white a sense of that mastery, that upper hand that I was talking about. Another concept psychologists really feel is important for living with chronic disease is to have an SOC. We love acronyms. A sense of coherence, right? A sense of coherence is just a fancy way of saying that you feel like if you're roller skating on ice, you can get off the ice, right? And it involves comprehensibility, manageability, and meaningfulness. Comprehensibility, cognitive aspect just means taking your thoughts and organizing both the internal and external factors that have that for why you're in the situation you're in, and making them understandable. It's basically an acceptance of what things are without approval of what things are, right? Acknowledging reality for what it is, not as what it should be. Manageability is a behavioral aspect, so your actions, just finding resources to solve problems, be willing to view problems as both a challenge and a task. And then meaningfulness, obviously a motivational and emotional aspect, involves the extent to which we feel our lives have significance and intention. Meaningfulness is not focused on changing beliefs or debating facts, but instead can keep you invested in the things that give your life the meaning and quality that you so desire and you really want to have in your life. And that your life can still hold moments of hope and joy. And there's a big interrelationship between coping and hope. And sense of coherence can help that because a sense of coherence strengthens coping strategies. And if you have good, strong coping strategies, you can maintain hope without resorting to false optimism. And false optimism and forced positivity can be toxic, right? And really destroy the true meaningfulness and mastery in your life. So, there's lots of different coping mechanisms. You're lucky, I'm not going to go through them all. I'm just going to say there's problem-focused ones, emotion-focused ones, meaning-focused ones. All of them can help restore meaning and purpose. And purpose is a really good thing to focus on. Having purpose involves having a clear goal, keeping a steadfast focus. It provides the drive and the motivation needed to stay engaged. And the focus is on situations and events that can be influenced, can be changed, can have a little upper hand, and increase confidence then in trying others. And setting and working towards goals is the key to living with purpose because the goals can provide a vision and a short-term motivation that reduces the likelihood of problems or setbacks knocking you off your course. All of coping strategies strengthen resilience and lead to the 3 conditions you need for them: ability to adapt, capacity to persevere, and my favorite, a determined engagement in life. I'm still living a life and I'm going to remain determinedly engaged, right? All of the people on the panels are determinedly engaged. So ways to build them. Be self-compassionate, especially during transitions. Transitions suck. Transitions are hard. Transitions seem like a downward slide often. And so the only way to truly help yourself as you transition is to be self-compassionate and then spread a little of that around to others. Keep a growing mindset versus a fixed mindset. Fixed is stagnant and algae grows. Growing may not be growing in the direction I planned, but I can still grow in some possible way. Practice reframing the frustrations you have by changing the story you tell yourself. You know, if your story is, life sucks, well, I'm not going to read to the end with you then, okay? I already know what's going to happen. So change your story that you tell yourself. Lower your expectations. It's always great. My mother told me that when I got married. It's the best advice I ever got. And gosh, she didn't tell me this, but maybe she should have. Remember, you're not failing, MaryAnn. Aim to be proactive, not reactive. Distinguish your illness from yourself. They're separate entities, right? Sometimes they seem like the same. Use fancy word, cognitive diffusion. Just means thoughts are thoughts, right? To me, the best question about a negative thought is this really useful right now? Is this helping me or anybody else right now? Learn what your triggers are and write them out. Sometimes seeing something in black and white can be really, really helpful. Keep yourself from returning to the past or time traveling to the future, and try and stay in the present moment as much as possible. Going to the past is very bitter. Going to the future is very anxiety producing. The present is a much better place to hang in, because you never know what's going to happen in that exact moment where you might just find something that makes you laugh or smile, right? And then, you know, all of the toolbox things for when you're really at your wit's end, just keeping a little toolbox for yourself. Reappraisal, problem solving, coping, self-statements, reframing, venting, emotional supports, humor, acceptance, mindfulness, relaxation techniques. You all have a toolbox. Just remind yourself of the toolbox you have. And even if you have to go through it by one, because one isn't working, try another, try another, try another. So facing multiple limitations day after day, month after month, year after year, wearing, and we find ways to cope. And sometimes they become maladaptive, right? And all maladaptive coping styles have a purpose. They're there to protect us from pain and grief. And in their own way, that makes kind of an irrational sense, right? They're maladaptive, but for the moment, I'm not feeling things. And then if I'm not feeling them, I don't have to grieve them, right? So let's look at some maladaptive ways of coping to try and avoid them. Cognitive distortions, something bigger than it truly is. All or none thinking, discounting any small positive, jumping to conclusions, personalization, should statements. All of these need to be reevaluated in the light of evidence that refutes them, right? Either or thinking, which is just a slightly different flavor of all or none thinking. And with chronic illness, it takes the form of thinking that people are either healthy or ill. It's either a healthy world or it's an ill world. And the healthy world has it all, right? Great employment, super relationships, fulfillment. And illness world creates insurmountable roadblocks only, and you're stuck in one or the other. The three biggies in maladaptive coping: blame, envy, guilt, not fun, bitter stuff. Not recognizing anger as a surface emotion that always covers up a deeper emotion, such as fear or hurt or powerlessness. And so when you're finding yourself really pissed off, try and look for what the deeper thing is that's going on. Maintaining clear boundaries. Role ambiguity with chronic illness is just a giant, I mean, that's a whole talk in and of itself, right? Role ambiguity can occur when parents have difficulty determining what their predominant parental role is, right? Am I a parent? Am I a caregiver? Am I a nurse? Likewise, an adult child of someone with a parent who has ALD. Am I a caregiver? Am I a bossy caregiver? I took care of my mom with dementia, double amputation, and I could be a real bossy caregiver at times. Am I a spouse and a partner, or am I a burden? You know, there's a lot of role ambiguity. Make room for all the roles. All the roles can fit in, right? But you have to make room for it to fit in. Sometimes you got to squeeze. And then it's really maladaptive when you don't recognize that you're having anticipatory grief, right? So I really just want to talk a little bit on that before I end. Because it's something that happens, especially with chronic illness and the losses that come with chronic illness, but it's not recognized. It can happen after a loved one's death, but it absolutely can come well before that. It involves mortality, but also the loss of abilities, the loss of independence, and it can occur in the earliest stages of an illness, or after a loss, or in the weeks or months leading up to an expected loss. And it's not only grief for mortality, but it's grief for just an accumulation of losses leading up to it, and then the loss of future dreams. It's absolutely normal, but it's generally misunderstood, and that's why it can be dangerous, because it's frequently mistaken for some of its symptoms: anxiety, irritability, fear, feelings of guilt, feelings of hopelessness and loneliness. That's all part of grieving, but sometimes people stay stuck in what it is they're feeling and think that that's what it is. This is just hopeless. There's resources out there for grief if you can recognize it for what it is. And it is very bitter. So let's look for some sweet in the anticipatory grief. It does serve a purpose. It can open a conversation on action that's important, or communication that really needs to happen, but you don't know where or when or how to start it. It can give you an opportunity to undertake planning tasks. It can provide an opportunity to grieve the little incremental losses along the way that can make adjusting to an eventual bigger loss easier. And it can provide opportunities for closure, reconciliation, forgiveness, and to me, most importantly, it can minimize the chance that you're left with regrets, because regrets are truly the unsolvable thing in life. So acknowledge your and honor your losses. Acknowledge yourself that you're here in the present moment. Acknowledge that you're grieving. Let it be okay for yourself. And it doesn't mean you're giving up. It just helps you shift back and forth between recovery-based energies and comfort-based energies. Communicate. Grief is different for everybody, so is anticipatory grief. And as long as you can talk with family and friends, it can make all the difference in the world. Because then everybody can understand what page you're on and where you're coming from. And then finally, just don't deny yourself feeling it, because anything that you deny now will prolong in the future. So, I want to end on a grieving topic, But the paradox of living is in finding a way to live through each stage of the bitter and the sweet, right? There's a lot of chapters in life. Some are good, some are bad, some are way too short, some are way too long. But all of the chapters have the same purpose, just moving you along to the final chapter. I encourage you to stay in the present and take a lot of mental snapshots along the way, because you're not going to pass this way again. And in closing, I have a very favorite quote. Life is your story. Write well, but edit often. Thank you.
MaryAnn, do you want to stay up for any questions? Do we have any questions?
Thank you so much for speaking on this topic. It's a really important topic that a lot of people don't really want to address. My question to you is, what advice do you have to somebody who finds themselves deep in a rut as like a first step to facing their problem and making a step towards productivity?
You know, that's a fabulous question. And in a way, somebody asked Chris, I think they were sitting over there, from someone on the chat, you know, if I'm not motivated or if I can't find a way out, what do I do? And inside, I wanted to stand up and say, motivation follows action. You know, you don't get motivated and then you take action. You take action even if you're not motivated, because action begets a little more motivation, right? But I think the first thing is to really just acknowledge this is hard. And there's going to be a lot of setbacks along the way. Those can be side steps or setbacks. And so trying to reframe for yourself, sorry, talk too much. Trying to reframe for yourself as best you can what you're in the middle of and not look for complete relief, right? You know, we're not a 1960s TV commercial. 2 little Alka-Seltzer, I'm all better and I'm happy and I'm dancing, right? No, you're not going to get complete relief. But sometimes I'll say to people, would 1% be worth it to you? And just about everybody says, I'll take 1%, right? Because then maybe I can get 2%. And then maybe I'm up to 15%. You know, I know doctors love to put things in mathematical and percentage and quantitative terms. And I'm saying maybe those are important, but take the quantitative and make it qualitative. Does that answer the question? Well, thank you.
Thank you
very
so
much.
MaryAnn. Big round of applause.